This lesson, we're going to be building a card battle game. So how to build a deck of cards, also how you can create the game logic for all of the interactions, determining which player wins. And this is a fully dynamic game, so we can have as many players as we want and updating, and they're all going to get cards dealt out to them. The battle will be between all of the players. Whichever player draws the highest card is going to win. We're outputting the cards in this view area. The player's information is here above, how many cards the player has left, and then the cards that were played in this round by the player. Message that's going to provide feedback for the players that player 6 is the winner, and indeed player 6 did draw the king. That returned back as a winner. They can do multiple rounds until one of the players eventually loses, runs out of cards. So they're going to be focused on JavaScript code and how we can apply JavaScript code, in particular to arrays, various array methods that can be used, building arrays and objects, manipulating content within the web page, how we can manipulate select values, and how to apply game logic in order to create full gameplay using JavaScript. Created a JS file, linked it to the HTML file, one element on the page with a class of game. So we've already selected that, and that's going to be where our game content is going to go. But before we do that, we want to create some cards. So we need to create an object, and this is where the card data is going to sit. And within the suits, we're going to list out all the different suits for the cards. So we've got the spades, we've got the hearts, there's the diamonds, and I'm going to keep it short. And the reason that I'm doing this is that this is going to allow us to generate the HTML version of the content, and we can set that with clubs as well. And this is all string values. So if I want it to output to the page, so selecting the main element and text content, and actually I'm going to set this as inner HTML, as this is going to be HTML structured content. So if we use the ampersand, and then one of the suit string values, and the semicolon afterwards, that's how we can generate these various characters that we can use for the cards. So all of the suits for the cards, they're going to generate out as HTML characters. And then we can use them for the visual display for the users. And that way we don't have to worry about any types of images, as we could just generate them using this type of structure. And this is how we're going to be able to output these values into the page. And of course, we're going to change the colors of the hearts and diamonds to be red. So let's continue to build this, where we've got the suits, and then we've got the value for the cards. So this is also going to be an object array, and with the property name of val. So this is where we would set up all of the different values. So for the cards, whatever values we want to hold in the cards. And making it dynamic like this, if you update any of the content within the array, that will also update the number of cards. So you can actually add cards that typically wouldn't be in a regular deck of cards if you wanted to within the gameplay. So there's also the jacks. So we just symbolize them with the J. There's the queens and the kings. So we're going to build it as a typical deck of cards. And when the data, so now that we've got the data in place, let's create the deck of cards and just create a variable called deck. So we want to build this deck of cards, and right now this will just be a blank array. And let's output and select building the deck of cards. So create a function to build the deck, and this will generate the cards into the deck object, so creating a deck of cards from the card data. So we want to loop through the suits and then apply to each suit a value. So we want to construct a card for each one of these, and then add that card into the deck of cards. Invoke the function to build the deck, and now we're going to loop through the suits first. Since the suits is nested, an array nested within the card data, we call the card data and then the suits property name, and then that's going to return back the array of the different suits that we have, and loop through each one of those. And we're going to build a card from that. So as we loop through, we want to return back the suit value. And then for the suit, each one of the suits is going to have a value for that as well. So within the suits, we're going to create another loop, and that's going to loop through the values. And we want to select each one of those. And then this is going to be what we have for the value of the card. And so now we're ready to construct the card object. So let's create the card object using the suit, and that can just come from the suit value that we have. We can also generate the icon, and the icon will be coming from the suit. And this is just going to be building these icons, just as we have it down here, as we have the spade. So adding it in and returning, pulling out the suit value. So that's going to create these icons that we have down here. Also, we want to set a background color. So we can do this with a ternary operator. So generate the background color. So depending on if the suit is hearts or diamonds, then we want to set the color to be red. So let's create the condition. So if the value of the suit is equal to hearts, or if the value of the suit is equal to diamonds, then we're going to set the background color to red. Otherwise, the background color will be black. So that will match the color of the deck of cards. So let's set the background color. And this is actually the icon color, so we can maybe just call it color. And set it as, I'm going to do CLR, and set that as what we've got for the background color value. And for the card value, or the card number, that's going to be pulling out the value that we've got for the card. So we can just return back the value of V. And then for the card value, let's return back the value of the card. And this is going to be contained within the index. As when we created the values, the aces are worth 1, and the kings would be the highest value card. So starting at 0, 1, 2, 3, all the way. So we don't have to use or rely on the actual character that we're looking at. And we can set a value using the index number. And I'm going to just do +1. And so this will generate the card object. And then within the deck, we'll push in the card that we've just created. So after we finish building it, let's take a look and see what we have for the deck of cards. So that generated 52 items within the array. And each one of these is going to have the card. So we've got the card number, the card value, the color, the icon, and the suit for spades. So this gives us enough information to work with. And now that we've generated the deck of cards, we can go back and we're going to set some game properties. So create an object that can be a global object for that. And first one we'll have is the number of players that we want to have. So in this case, we're just going to start out with 2 players. So now that we've built the deck of cards, we're ready to create some interactions on the page. I'm going to create a function that's going to allow us to make elements on the page. So create an element, and here we're going to get the parent, the element type, also the class of the element, and then the inner HTML content of the element. So let's construct the element, and using the document create element, this will allow us to create an element using the JavaScript code and whatever element type that we want to create. So that's going to assign that element, and then using the class list, add whatever we have for the class. And I'm not going to use the actual class name, I'll use CLA to add the class. And then for the element, the inner HTML, set that to whatever we've got as the value that we've passed into the maker. And then we'll return back the newly created class, attaching it to the parent using the append child, and attaching the element to the page. So this gives us ability to generate page elements. I'm going to comment out this line that we had here where we were showing the characters for the suits. And within the main object, this is where we're going to create the page elements. So I want to create a main gameplay area. So call that the game area. And using the maker, we'll pass in these parameters into it. So this is where all of the game action is going to take place. And we're also will regenerate out the number of players as well when we create this. So let's set up the game area. So the parent for the game area is main. The element type that is going to be generated is going to be a div. The class that we're going to be assigning to it is game area. And the HTML for it can just be blank right now. So we don't need to have any content added into there. And we want to loop through. So once we build the deck of cards, the next action that we want to do is add players. And this is also where we want to deal out the players' decks as well. So let's create a function that's going to be called add players. And this will add the player elements to the screen. And we do have just the two right now. And we need them to look the same. So select and create the add players function. And we'll set up a for loop within here that we can use in order to loop through the items. And using the game players value as the length of items that we want to create for the page. So this will, if we change the number of players, this will also change the number of items that we're adding to the page. So we want to use the maker function in order to add items to the page. And this is going to be added to the game area. So it's going to be the element that we're adding it into. This can be a player area, so go to class of player and update where we've got the string value. Can update this, and this can have a value that says the I plus 1 player. And this is just going to create an element on the page. So there's our two elements for the page. I'm going to add a class to it. So within the head section, update the style properties, and I'm going to create a class for the player. And this will set a width of 25%. Also add a border, one pick solid, and do a light color border. We'll also set a minimum height of 200 pixels. And then we want to stack them, so we can do a float left in order to stack them next to one another. Can also add in some padding for there, and maybe make it a slightly smaller minimum height. So that way, whatever number of players we have selected, if we update this to 4, that will add in 4 players on the screen. If we go to 3, that will add in 3 players. 2, that will add in just the 2 players within the game area. And that's applying the class to the element. I'm also going to update and set to all of the elements the box sizing, and set it to border. So that way, whatever spacing we have, that's going to remove out any of the spacing. So now let's try it one more time, and that should give us all 4 players all across. So for the full 25% of available spacing. Also for the main game area, let's set some styling for that class as well. So this can be a width of 80 vertical width, and let's set the margin to be auto for that. So that will automatically center the content. And I'm actually going to use 33, so that gives us a little bit more space to play with. And as we make it wider, that will adjust that content. Within the game area, also for the text align, I'll make it all center align, so all of the text will center align. So now that we've created the players, we want to add cards to the players. And we've got a deck of cards that's built. So I want to randomize the content within the array And using the sort method, that gives us an option to sort the content in place for an array. So let's apply that once the deck of cards is built and just outside of where we're looping, because we're only building the one deck of cards. So let's sort it, and we'll sort it in place using the sort argument and returning back with math random either a positive or a negative value, and then that's going to affect the sort order for the deck. So let's take a look at the deck and just see what we've got. And we should have a randomized sort for the cards, so they're not going to be within the order that they were created. And now that we've got a randomized sort order for the cards, that means that we can deal out the players' cards to each one of the players. So let's create an array, and this will just be the cards for each player. So this is going to be an array, and each one of those arrays we can nest the players' cards within there. Let's add the cards into the player's deck. So we're going to need two values in order to do the slice, and the first value is going to be the start value, and the start value is going to be 0 by default, and then the end value, and this is where the slice is going to end. So we need to calculate out that we've got a deck of cards, and the deck has a length. So let's take the deck length, and we want to divide that by the number of game players that there are. So this will allow us to calculate out how many cards, so where the first start position and the end position is going to be. And then once we've done the slice, then we can create the second start and end values for the next player. So let's select that, where we're going to be selecting the game cards, and with the index value of whatever we've got for I, and then assigning the value where we're going to be taking the deck of cards and using slice with a start and an end value. And I'm also going to do a math floor for this. And this is actually going to be the number of cards that the user is going to get. And for the end, we can set the end value, and the end is actually just going to be the start plus what we have for the number. So we can create a separate variable for that, or we can just use whatever one we have. So the end is going to be constantly changing, and once we've got the start, so right now it's going to take whatever the previous end was and then add to that end the value for the num. So that will create the new end for the players, and we'll output into the console the game cards. So that gives us two arrays, and the first array has 26 and the second array has 52, and that means that we also need to set the new start value as well. So it didn't set the start value, and the start value, the new start value, is going to be the end value. So that should give us two arrays with 26 each. Let's update the number of players to 3 and just see how that works out. So that gave us 3 players with 17 cards each. So that's going to give us the total number of cards to 51. Let's try with 5 players. So that gave us each holding 10 cards. So it provides an even split for the number of cards and creates their own arrays of cards that we can start using as we deal out the cards. So these are all going to be the unique values because they're coming from the deck, and the deck was already shuffled. So I wanted to output at the top for the player the number of cards that they have left. So making this slightly smaller, because I already have it at a fairly large size, so I had it at 200%. So we've got the player 1 and the player 1 value. So let's add in another element there, and this is going to be the actual card. So using the maker, I'm going to add another div to there, and I'll set this up as the card value and give this one, so we're not going to add any HTML text in there. So this will just going to be creating a card, and this is added into the player area. and we'll create a separate element. So this is going to be the main parent for the content, and then we're going to add the other content into there. So that's getting added into the element, and this is also added into the element. So these elements are now going to be sitting within the main one. The main one isn't going to have any content. Actually, this can be known as player. This is the info, and the first one is not going to have any content within the main element. So that's going to create the card, and then also this can be the score. So this is whatever number of cards are left, and we can add this after we've determined how many cards the player has. So that's another div, and I'll just give this a class of score. So this is going to be using the length, which we've just created, and maybe we could just say, and this actually just needs to get the length value from the array. So 26 cards are left for each one of the players. Let's create the card element, and the card element, this is where the card is going to go when we flip it. So I'm going to give it a minimum height, and this can be about 60 pixels. We'll set a background color for it, and right now I'll set the background color to a grayish color. So that's where we can add the card, also adding in a border around it. So the border, and I'll make it a darker border, and maybe we want to make this actually a lighter color. So that's where we can add the card, and maybe add a slight margin around it. That's a little bit too big of a margin, so scale that down. So 5 pixels. So this is where the card content is going to go. Let's also set the line height so that when we do add content, it will be centered. So now we've got 26 left on each one of those. So we want to have a button on the page, and the button is going to be where we can initiate the gameplay. So that's going to be added to the game area as well. And the button is going to be where the action takes place and allow us to create the content and update the content. So that's also added to the main. And I'll give it a class of button, and the content, we'll just say next round. I want to add the button, add some styling to the button. So we'll set it as display block, and it'll clear both. So that will move the button to the bottom, and set the margin to auto for it. So that will center the button. I'm going to add to the player a margin bottom, so that will give us some more spacing between the button and the content of the players. And just to make it easier to select where we've got the card info elements, we can create an array that can hold that information. So that we can add into the main cards, and we can just call this player. So we'll just call this the view array, and within the view array we'll update and we'll append the element, the card element, into it. So that's contained within the game view. So that should just go into the game view. We push the card into there, and now when we open up the game object, this is where we've got all of the views. So for each one of the cards that we've got on a screen, if we update the number of players, then this is also going to update the number of elements within the view that we can select that's contained within the game area. So we've got 3 players. These are the cards that the players have, and then these are the elements where we want to load the card into. Let's add a message area to the game board. So this is going to be an area where we can communicate with the user, and we're going to add that just underneath the button and create another div for that. We can use the maker function in order to generate the div. So this is going to be, again, attached to the main object, a div. Let's give it a class of MES, and the content in it, click to play. So that will add that to the screen, and I'm going to actually add this just underneath the button and apply some styling to the MES class that we just created. So for MES, and adding in some styling, we'll do a text align to center align the text. Also add in some padding, do a border around it, and save that. And I'm also going to apply the clear both to it so that if we do have any float issues, we can remove those float issues. So this is just where we can have some information, such as who the winner is of the round and so on. So that's going to be displayed in that text area. Go back to the code, and now let's create the gameplay where when the user presses the button, this is where the action is going to take place, and this is where we're going to kick off all of the gameplay. So within the button press, add an event listener, and the event that we're going to be listening for will be a click event. And we can just do it as an anonymous function. And we'll run a function called gamer. And this function is going to take a few parameters in. So this way that we can call the function until in case there's a tie for the players. So we can continuously loop through until the tie has been resolved. So let's create a temporary array. So this is the temporary holding array that we can use in order to pass in the players that are in play currently, and we'll pass that into the gamer function. So we only want to load through the players, so we want to create a temporary array with the players that we're going to be using. So we want to loop through all of the players and identify the ones that still have cards left, and from those, these are the ones that we're going to select and send into the gamer in order to play through that round. So looping through the game players, increment it by 1. And we'll do a condition to check to see if game cards I length. So this is the value for the player's number of cards. So as long as they're greater than 0, then that player is still in the game. So that means that we can add them to the temporary array. So we push in the index value, and that's going to be sent over to the gamer in order to play through that round with that player. If the player is not in play, we'll select the main element, and that's going to be contained within the game view array. So we can again use the index value in order to identify the player. Let's update the game view using the index value. We can set the inner HTML. So maybe we'll just set an X in order to X that player out. And also we'll take the element. So we can apply it within an element for the game view. So that just shortens the code a little bit and makes it a little bit easier to read. So that's going to be the style. And we'll set the background color so that this player, we know that this player is going to be out and that they're not going to be in play anymore. So set a different background color so we can identify that player. And then once we've finished going through the loop, go through and we'll set the message of the inner HTML. And this can just say the battle has begun with some dots there. And then we're going to send over to the gamer, so invoke the gamer function with the players that are currently in play. And then we're going to also send in a empty array. And this is where we're going to hold all of the cards that the player has won. So the idea is here that we're going to continuously loop through. If it's a tie within that round, then we're going to continuously loop through the gamer function, call it within itself as a recursive function until we have one clear winner, and then that winner is going to get all of the cards. So that's why we're passing in an empty array, because right now we don't have any cards that we're adding for the holder array. So now that we're within the gamer, we want to loop through all of the elements, all of the players that are in play, and we want to track the high values. So selecting, and we'll create an array called vals. And this again is going to be a temporary array that's going to live within the gamer function, and it's going to track all of the values of the card values. And this is what we can use in order to determine which is the high value from the array, and return back that value and then check to see which players are going to be the winners for this round. So taking the in play array, we can loop through each one of them, and these are just going to hold the index values of the players. So we can reference it as I, and that's only containing the index values that we've got as we're looping through the players. So this is going to be a listing of all the players that are currently still active. You can console log out the in play in order to debug it. So let's try it out. We press the button, battle has begun, and right now all the players are in play because they all have cards that they have that are available. I'm going to make a few updates to what we have for the card data, and we'll create a new array for the card data, and this is just going to be a shorter version so that there's more chance that we're going to throw a tie, and this will give us an opportunity to debug the content, and this will also have less cards for the players. There's another update that I want to also add in, and that's as we're constructing the array, I want to have an output of what's happening. So besides that we've got the 4 left, we want to apply and show the player what cards have been played. So create a separate an array within the game object for that, and I'll just give it a name of S. So similar to what we're doing with the view, where we're tracking the elements for S, add those in. And then as we're constructing the page content within the score function, where we're adding the players to the screen, this is where we can update it. And instead of having a score value, we can just pass in a blank value into the score, and I'll add a couple other elements into the score. So one will be how many cards are left. So essentially saying the same content that we just have, and that can be within the maker, and that's going to be added into the score. And then when we select the score element, we can select either the first or the last child and make an update to the first one, which is going to be the cards left, and then the second one is going to be the cards played. So that's going to be referenced as the last element that we have within the score element. And we're tracking the full score element into the game array. Let's give it a class of box so we can apply some styling to it. And then I'm going to add in the number of cards that are currently left. And we'll also set this up to dynamically get added. And do another one where we'll do the cards played. So the card played. And this will give us an area where we can update and add content into. So this is also added to score, also a div box. And for this one, I'm not going to have any content that's being added into it. Just going to update this for the $sign. And so now we're see how this goes where we've got undefined. So just leave it as blank for now, and we'll populate some content into there as we go through the gameplay. So going back to where we had the gamer, building out the game logic that we want to achieve. So we loop through all of the players. We have the players in play, and these are the ones that still have cards left to play. So let's select the player element, and selecting in the game the view, and we can use the value of I as the index value to return back the card element. We also want to check as well to see if the player has cards as we are looping. So there is a possibility that there are no game cards left for the player. So make sure that there are game cards left, and we can check the length just as we did when we added the player. So we're just checking to see if the length is greater than 0. So this is essentially the same check to see if this length is greater than 0, and if it is, then we can play the player cards. Otherwise, the player is not going to get added, and we're not going to play through the player, and the player obviously won't be able to win because they don't have any length within their cards. So make sure that they do have more available cards, and let's select the first card off the top of the player's array. Use the index value to identify the correct value for the cards, the correct player for the card deck, and then using shift we can get the first item in the array and return it back into the variable first. So now the variable first is going to have the card content. We want to create a function that will allow us to show the card. So this is taking the value of the card, and then this is the element that we wanted to add the card into to update the card. So create a function called show card and then generate that. And this will allow us to show the cards And within this function, we'll take the values for the first, and this is going to be the card contents, and this is going to be the element that we're updating and that we're adding the card into. So select that, and we can take the inner HTML of the card element and wrap it in a div. And because we're sending the card contents object, and I'll shorten this to CC, and now we can use the CC and get the properties of the card number, and also add in the card icon that we stored originally when we were creating the cards. And then update the element style and set the color to whatever we had for the background color of the card. So click the button, and that shows the cards on the screen. So let's continue to build out the logic for the gameplay. So now we're showing the cards. We also want to add and set the card value into the vals array so that we can determine which is the high card. So using push, we're adding to the array, to the vals array. This is our holding array for the card value. Then we got the card contents object value within first, which was returned back from the cards array. So now we get the value of the cards. And we also want to add the card into the holder array so that we have a value that we can push in and allow for the winner to pick up all of the values within the holder array. And we've sent in that blank holder array into the gamer function. And this will continue to build until a winner is identified, and then the winner will get the whole pot of contents from the array added into their cards array. So for the content, we can take the game and S, use an index value. So this is the scoring area. And now selecting the last child can update the inner HTML and add to it. And the content that I'm going to add to it is going to be the card and the card number, and then also the icon. So that way we know which cards the player has played through. Let's try it and see what we've got. So it looks like we're throwing an error and going back. So just make sure that within the S element that we have a couple elements that are in there. So let's clear this and do some debugging where we've got the game object and selecting the S array. So it doesn't look like we have anything within the S array. So let's take a look and see what's happened, but we didn't add in the score. So we need to take the game S and push the score element into that. So now try that again. And now we're outputting those values that the player has played into that area. So now we can see which cards have been played by the player, and that's coming from the gamer function. So now we need to determine who the winner of this round is. So create another array, and this is going to be an array that's going to store just the winners. In order to get whatever the high value is here, so all of these cards have different values. The current high values are going to be the value of 2. So we want to be able to return back the high value. So create a variable called high value. And the math max allows us to return back a high value. So if you have a number of values in the math max and we comma separate them, that's going to show you whatever the high value there is. And because this is an array that we've got within the vals, if we have an array of values and we use the math max and we simply have the array in there, we're going to get not a number. So we can pass in all of the arguments from the array using the 3 dots. So placing that in front of the array will return back the maximum value from the array using the math max method. So that's going to return back 7, which is the largest value within the array. So we can do the same where we've got all of these values that we've tracked and pushed into the vals array. And in order to get the high value out, we can use the 3 dots in order to indicate that this is an array and we want to get the values from the array. We can log out the value, And this is the card value that was originally set. So let's play through, and we see that the high value is going to be 3. So the ace is worth 1, 2 is worth 2, 3 is worth 3. Let's clear that and try that again. So now we've got a high value of 2. And in this case, we do have 2 players that have matching high values. So we need to do a runoff of the players. So let's add the matching players to the winners array. So this will give us a listing of the winners. So looping through all of the vals that we've got and using for each, we can get the value of the index. We get the value of the card, which is going to be contained within the vals array. And as well, let's pick up the index value so we can identify which player we want to identify as the winner. So we'll have a condition within the for each, and we'll check to see if the value of E is greater than or equal to the high value. And if it is, then we push that index value into the players winners array, and that will give us a listing of which players have the high value. So let's try that now into the console. And it looks like we've got player with index value of 1 and index value of 2 that are the winners. So arrays are 0 based and our players are 0 based. So we've identified them as 1, 2, and 3. So we need to add 1 to those in order to identify which winners turned out to be the winners of this. So now we can apply a condition to have some logic in order to select and determine which one of these players is the winner. And if there's a tie game, then we're going to go for another round and send those winners back into the gamer function with all of the cards that are within the pot, and that's going to be contained within the holder array. So we'll check to see if winners is greater than 1. So that means that there has been a tie game. So output within the message, inner HTML, and we'll add to that there's been a tie game, tie, and we can output the winners, although it's going to output their index values. But for now, we'll output those winners there, and it's going to output it just so that we have some feedback for as we're developing this. And we want to return the gamer with the winners array, so that's going to hold all the index values of the players that won, and then all of the cards that are currently within the pot is going to be contained within the holder. So let's have a second condition that can be else if. So if the winner's length is 0, that means something went wrong. And we'll just output that there is no winner. And this one actually shouldn't fire off, but as we're debugging, just make sure that we cover all of the possibilities. So this will just say no winner. And then the last result is going to be that if there is only one element, one within the length, we don't have to identify it because we've checked for 0 length, we've checked for larger than 1. So by default, this is going to be what we've got for the value of 1. So let's select the winners and get their value using the index value of 0. So if we only have the one item in the array, we can select it using 0. And then add to that player's cards. And this is where we can use the index value, which we've got under temp, and push the value of the holder array into it. And just as we saw with the math, that if we push the array into the winning array, what's going to happen is that this is going to add the holder array as an item within the array. So it's going to nest the array within the array. So if we want to output all of the items from the array and push it into the array, we can use the 3 dots, and that will allow us to break the array apart and add each one of those items from this array into that array. And then lastly, let's update the inner HTML and output who the winner is. So the winner is player, and this is where we've got to calculate who the winner is. So we can use the temp value plus 1. So we don't using the index value of the winners, temp value plus 1, and this will indicate who the winner is in the output. So now we can try it And we've got the battle has begun. So there was actually a tie between 1 and 2. So these are index value 1 and 2. So that would mean that player 2 and 3 tied, which they did. So they both got 3s. And then the next round, they pulled another set of cards, and that turned out to be a 2 and a 3. So player 2 ended up being the winner. And let's see if that actually is going to match. As we're throwing an error because we're tracking out, and it should have been actually player 3 that won. And what happened is that we only had the 2 new items that we sent into the array, so their index values weren't being reflected properly within the winners array, and that means that it was going to be supposed to be the last player, which was player 3, not player 2, that won. So we need to do some debugging because we only sent in on the second round, because there was a tie, we sent into the gamer the winners, and that looped through, and we were using the index value for the loop in order to indicate which are the 2 winners for this round. So when we come into the gameplay, initially we've got 0, 1, and 2. The next time that we go through, within line 30, we only have player 1 and 2 that are being reflected. We've got a high card of 3, and the problem here is that we're pushing in the index value instead of the actual value from the player. So let's select that where we've got the in play and make an adjustment to this function where we can push in using the in play and the index value from that array. So try that again, and we'll run through the code. And this time we got a tie again, and the winner is going to be player 3. Let's look at what we had as the outputs. So the first round was a 2, a 3, and a 3. So player 2 and 3 tied. Next round, player 2 got an ace, player 3 got a 3, and that's where player 3 is the winner. So all of the cards have been added now to player 3. So we need a way to update the scores. We don't immediately see the scores being updated. So let's run a function where once we've completed all of the rounds, we'll update the scores so that they're actually going to be accurately reflecting what we've got for the output. So create the function called update scores. And for this function, we need to set a temporary array. And this can be used in order to populate and check to see if the player should be in or out of the game. So let's loop through all of the score elements so that we can update them. We can use the for each method in order to loop through, pick up the element, which is going to be the score element, and then its index value so that we can identify the player that's associated with that element, and create a variable called card count. And this can serve as the number of cards that are currently left. And that's going to be contained within the cards array using the index value to identify which player we want to select the deck of cards from. And this is going to be returning back the length, the number of cards that are available for that particular player. And then we need to check to make sure that the card count, so if it's larger than 0, it will return back a positive value, a true value. And for there, we can select the first child. And this is going to be the first element, selecting the inner HTML as we did add the 2 elements into the score element. And here we can set the number of cards left. So we already have set it at 4 left. So we want to be able to update this with whatever the current value is for the card count for that particular player. So this will update the number of cards that are left for the player. And then for the temp play, we're going to just push into the array, and we can use the length of the temp play array to determine how many players are left in the game. If there's only 1 player left in the game, then the game is actually going to be over and we have a clear winner from the game. So if they are not in play, if they don't have any cards left, then let's do something selecting the parent node and update the style. So set the opacity of the element, and I'll set it to 0.4. So this will gray it out, set the opacity so that that indicates to the other players that that 1 player is out of the game. So now let's take the temp play and check the length. So this is going to be where we determine whether we need to end the game or not. So if it's less than or equal to 1, that means that we do have a clear winner. So we should have at least 1. I just usually use the less than, just in case we do throw any errors. We'll be able to see it in the output, as we're going to be outputting game over and then indicating which is the last remaining player. If we don't have a value there for the temp play, then we need to then we're going to be throwing an error. But we should always have a value there for the temp play. So let's just output that using its index value of 0, and then +1 will indicate which player wins, because again, we're tracking the players with their array values using the index values as we're creating the loops. So that's identifying the players. So that's why we always have to add the +1. And then also, let's take the button and we'll disable the button. So set the next round button to be true. And then here you can update the inner or the text content of the button. And this can just say game over. You can even hide the button as well if you wanted to. So let's see. And we have the battle has begun. So the winner is player 2. Double check, and it does look like player 2 won. So what happened in the first round is that they all tied. So all the players had tied, and then we went for a second round, and this is where player 2 ended up winning. So that player 2 ended up getting all of the cards. They have 8 cards left. Player 1 has 2. Player 3 has 2. Now player 1 has 1 card left. So we went for multiple rounds on this one as well. And winner is player 1. So that grays out player 3 because they're out of the game. With player 1 and player 2, there's a tie for them. So the winner is player 1. Go to the next round. And we need to actually clear out all of the cards. So we need to update that this is being cleared out. And also, let's update the inner HTML of this element when we're updating the scores, that this one is out of the game. So just write none left within the child. And before we send off to the gamer, we can clear the styles of the element. So as we do click here, and just before we send it out, if the player is out of the game, then we're going to update the game s using the index value and update the inner HTML. And we can just set that to out. So that will indicate that that player is out of the game. So run through it again a few times. And we also should be clearing out the element because we continuously are adding to the plays. So it does look like that we had a clear winner, which was player 1. We played through all of the rounds, and player 1 ended up winning. So these two got grayed out because they ran out of cards. We're going to clear out the last child for this element and set the last child and inner HTML. And we can just clear it before we send off the next round on that. And for the first child, that's where we're going to set the inner HTML to be out. So play through it again and just see how that's going to work. So this player 2 is now going to be out. So there it get updated to being out. And we continuously play through the rounds. And once the game completes, we've got player 1 is only one with any cards left. So that means that player 1 is the winner and the game is over. Let's also now try bringing back in the full deck of cards. And we can update the number of players to 4. Or whatever number of players we want, and we should be able to play through all of them the same way. So in this round, player 3 is the winner. So that's indicating that player 3 is the winner. They had the king, which was the highest card on that round. Player 5 is the winner for this one. And it looked like there was a tie on this round. So we went through a tie on 2 and 4. So let's make an update to where we're outputting those values. So instead of having the 2 and 4, we want to output the actual winners. We can loop through the winners length. Where we're outputting the winners, we've got the tie here. So let's update this value where we've got the tie. We can break the function. And then for the winners, use for each to go through each one of the winners and return back the value. And then for those values that we're returning back, we'll update the message with the actual winner or the player value. So we can use P and then the $sign and take V plus 1, as that will update the index value with the new value that we wanted to use for the player, and then output the last results where we've got the 3 dots just after the players, after we've selected the players. So now let's try that again, and this time we've got a tie with P5 and P3 and P5. So player 5 got a value of a jack, player 3 got a value of a jack, and it turned out that player 5 did the next round and they won. And play through it a few times just to make sure that the functionality and everything is working as expected. You can update the number of players, decrease the number of players, make some updates to the visuals as well. The info class, to make it stand out a little bit more, we'll set a background and then update the font color to be white. And you can make customizations to the visuals as needed.